Cape Ann Report, and I'm your host, Maureen Aylward. Our topic is Ben Butler at the Gloucester Stage Company, and here with me is MJ Boylan, a resident expert on Ben Butler and also a member of the board of the Gloucester Stage, and Ames Adamson, who is playing the lead role as General Benjamin Butler, and Doug Bowen-Flynn, who plays Lieutenant Kelly. Welcome to Cape Ann Report.
Thank you so
nice
much.
to be here.
I'm so excited to have you here. Of course, it's the 40th anniversary year of the Gloucester Stage Company, which is really remarkable for a local institution, really, cultural institution here. And to have such an amazing play like Ben Butler that has local roots. So let's start with the namesake of the play, Ben Butler. And MJ, I'm going to throw this to you first, but I thought we'd talk a little bit about the man. Give us a sense of who Benjamin Butler was, and then we'll talk about the character of Benjamin Butler in the play.
All right, first of all, I want to emphasize I'm not an expert on Ben Butler. I'm an avid student of Ben Butler. I became interested in him, a long time ago because a friend of mine is his great-great-grandson. And when we decided to do the play, I wanted to learn more about him. And so I've been studying him intently for the last year, I guess, and it's been fun. He is a really dense character. He was one of the 19th century's great American men. He was probably the most accomplished lawyer in Massachusetts. He was a 5-time congressman, having run for Congress for the first time from a tent in Bayview. He was governor of Massachusetts. It took him 7 times to get there, but he did it. He almost became president because Lincoln asked him to run for re-election with him, in the second election, 1864, and he refused. But he did participate as lead counsel in the impeachment trial of Andrew Johnson. He was also a businessman and a military man. Which is what the play is about. And in terms of business, he owned a lot of mills in Lowell, which is where he grew up. But he summered here in Bayview. He came to Gloucester initially just out of college. He went to what's now Colby College. As we find out in the play, he didn't go to West Point.
No.
But he came to Gloucester one summer and was a crew member on a fishing schooner. And he had been kind of a weak, slight young child, and after that summer, he really filled out and became, a serious physical presence, and that's how he first learned about Gloucester. And he settled here later as a summer resident when he acquired a vast amount of property in Bayview as a fee from a client who couldn't pay his bill. And actually Butler is the one who named Bayview.
Really?
Yeah.
That's so fascinating.
It's nice to be able to claim him. I thought of him, historically as a Lowell fellow, and he was, and also a Washington guy, but he's a Cape Ann guy too.
Right, and he owned the Cape Ann Granite Company.
That's right.
We'll get to that a little bit later, but Ames, playing General Benjamin Butler in the play, tell me what that was like with getting to know both about him as a man and also the preparation that you've gone through to play his character.
I'll say that I was given the script however many years ago. I couldn't tell you now.
You've played him 3 times.
3 times.
3
I
different
played him
productions.
3 times.
Let's get
but I
that
was
in
given
there.
the script to read, and we scheduled at the New Jersey Rep in Long Branch a table read with some actors and producers and stage management and stuff like that. And I read it. Oh, what is this about? Oh, this is good. And we did the read, and I was hooked, just based on the most cursory information, like a Wikipedia article or something like that, and the play. And then they cast me right after the reading for the show. So I did buy the book Stormy Ben Butler, which was really very useful in understanding just where he came from and what he was about and what he did. But as an actor, all of that stuff is great and very useful, and you can get a lot of psychology or psychological understanding about a person, but you really have just the confines of the script or the framework of the script to use. So all of that prep, I think, goes in, and then you just have those words and that little world that you have to deal with, and I think it colors everything that we do, or I do at least, in preparing the man, as far as I know.
It's a terrific script. It's really dynamic
yes.
and very well written. The character just jumps off the page at you. They all do. They're all really very well written, very distinct characters.
Very much so. And of course we have Lieutenant Kelly, Benjamin Butler, Shepard Mallory, who was a real person like Benjamin Butler. Lieutenant Kelly isn't. He's a fictional character. And Major John B. Carey of the Confederacy, who was a real person. And every one of these guys are so distinct and exciting, and what they have to say is interesting and fun and serious and just witty.
And I'll say what Richard Strand, the playwright, has done this great job of creating this recreation of this scenario, but there's humor in the show, quite a bit actually, which much of it is Richard Strand's, but some of it's historically accurate, which is the Stormy Ben Butler book surprised me. The just sort of sardonic humor of Ben Butler, the man, was.
So Doug, I have a question for you. Could you take us through the play, take us through everything you could tell us about what happens? I don't want you to give anything away, of course, because I know the play is still happening, but could you give us the context and set the stage, set the table for us?
The story begins, we discover in the very second line of the play that Virginia has seceded. So they are now officially, by their standards, not part of America. And 3 runaway slaves have shown up at Fort Monroe. This is all more or less historically accurate. That timeline really was almost that close. Looking for sanctuary. So either they want to just get away from the Confederacy, or they want to join the Union, but this is the scenario. And then the play builds around the meetings between Shepard Mallory and Ben Butler as they get to know each other, and comes to this point of crisis about what is Ben Butler going to do, because if he sends this person back, it will go very, very badly. And if he doesn't send him back, he's violating the U.S. Constitution, the
Fugitive
Slave Act, and Lincoln's own promise not to interfere with slavery. And so he's really up against it. And just as a historical bit, this is not in the play, Ben Butler had already gotten in trouble because he put down an uprising in Baltimore that cost him his commission in Baltimore, and that's how he ended up at Fort Monroe in the first place.
He sounds like a troublemaker.
He's the sort of person that wasn't afraid of going out on moral and political limbs. He did champion in his life a lot of causes that weren't popular. Outside of the play, he was a proponent of women's suffrage and paper currency and lots of things that weren't very popular. In the play, the move he makes is very exciting, and you could say it changes the course of history, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
I mean, yeah, it really does. I mean, it becomes the basis. What he does becomes the basis for everything that followed.
Emancipation.
Yeah.
And it's important to note, too, that this is the 400th anniversary of the first Africans arriving in America at the point where Shepard Mallory essentially came to Fortress Monroe.
Right.
And this was sort of the beginning of slavery in America, and really kind of the germ for the end of slavery in America at this point.
So that's like the critical heart of the play, it sounds like, is it dealing with this issue again, looking at slavery, looking at race relations, and that the back and forth between Shepard Mallory and Benjamin Butler. And I mean, the play sounds totally relevant to today. And what do you say to that? Like, what makes it relevant for you as actors, and also for the audience who's viewing
There
it?
are so many things. Shepard Mallory has a great line in the play where he says, "You two are getting ready to, the North and the South are getting ready to kill each other because they see things differently." right? That's the only thing that ever really matters, is people do horrible things because they see things differently, is more or less the statement he makes. And I think that is so encapsulating of our situation today, where
But in
people
this
see things
play,
differently.
people are able to fight through those differences and see things from a different point of view than they had before, which is incredibly important. But I wanted to say one thing, and that is the notion that a person, that a human being is property or chattel or an object, I think is very relevant today. We have people coming into the country illegally and
Seeking asylum.
legally seeking asylum, who are being treated as objects, not as human beings. And for me, that's important. The thought that a human being would be considered a piece of property owned by another person is just terrifying.
Well, it's quite literally dehumanizing,
Right.
and the play
To all
actually
involved.
the play actually starts out that way. General Butler doesn't want to talk to Shepherd Mallory. He's
No.
too busy, and besides, what on earth could he have to say to a slave? What possible conversation could they have that would be of interest to him? This is something for other people to handle, certainly not
There's a
him.
law, and the law is clear. They must be returned.
And it opens an enormous can of worms and is a huge pain for him if he deals with this,
Yeah.
which is very much what we're dealing with in America today at the border. Oh, you know, if we take these people in, that opens a whole other can of worms. But we have this, you have to ask yourself, if you were in 1861, would you be the one who would send Shepherd Mallory back to the Confederacy? Because it really is. He's coming from, at this time, the foreign nation of Virginia to America to seek asylum.
And if you were that enslaved person, would you do everything in your power to get away from that condition, or would you just submit to it? I think those are important points too.
Because certainly we celebrate slaves who were able to get away. I mean, that is,
Yes.
historically, we see this all through. We see this with Jews trying to get here from Germany and being turned away.
Right.
So this is a theme you mentioned.
And the relevance is clear.
Yes.
It's
Right,
hard,
it's
it's hard to say no to someone whose story you know and whose
Yes.
life becomes familiar. When he's just a runaway slave, it's easy for Butler to say no and dismiss him. Once he gets to know him, and this is why the play is so good. The humanity of these two men, as they get to know each other, and as they break down one another's preconceptions of each other, it's a fascinating story in how two very intelligent men who happen to disagree on something, how they come to this mutual respect, and actually I think they like each other.
I have a question about the power of theater. I mean, obviously, all three of you are really committed to theater. It's your jobs. And MJ, this is a passion for you. You're a lawyer.
Yeah.
And also Ben Butler connection. But the power of theater to be able to provoke and insert learning into the audience, but and why people need to go to the theater, I guess, to have these experiences. A lot of us are on our phones, we watch television, there's so many other choices. Why go to the theater to see something like this? Ames?
Well, we're human beings, and the act of storytelling is the most human thing, certainly. And to go into a space where there are other human beings telling you a story is very, very powerful. And it can be a musical, and it can be an O'Neill piece or Shakespeare or whatever, but you're seeing another human being, a live person, telling you a story. And that's our basic form of communication. And we supplant that with a box, with a device or a television or we isolate ourselves, essentially. So I think going to a common place where other human beings are, to hear a story being told, is the most primitive, basic, wonderful thing that we do as sentient beings.
Mm-hmm. Doug?
And there's a connection that happens in live theater as film goes more and more for the world of reality or heightened reality. With, we're going to make the CGI and we're going to have 3D and I've taken students to the theater for the first time, and their comment, "It's so real." It actually is the next. You think we've had theater forever, and all these other media came out that supplanted theater in many ways, and now theater is the thing that actually taps into more than what a two-dimensional representation can do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I wanted to touch on that because, one, we have the Gloucester Stage here and some other theater groups that are present, Rogers Street Theater and the Cape Ann Shakespeare group. And so we do have theater here, and we have theater in the schools here on Cape Ann too. That's a big thing. But that connection is so powerful, especially to see a professional production like this. And a question about the production itself. Let's go into, will you take us in, peek behind the curtain a little bit? Because I like the behind the scenes pieces. There are some stories that you can tell us about what it's like backstage, or maybe when you're preparing for this particular show, or I don't know. Can you take us backstage for a minute?
Well, can I just say the clothes look uncomfortable? Are they? They're not? Oh, good. They
I've
shouldn't
got
be. They should feel like clothes.
Depends on how warm the theater gets on any
Right.
given night.
I've got about 4 inches of padding, which I don't really need as I get older, but it's there. An undershirt, foam padding, a Lycra cover, a cotton shirt, a vest, and a wool coat, and trousers with suspenders.
It looks like a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
No wonder why you're exhausted at the end of the play.
It's a long, hot performance, that's for sure. And I've got 2 sets of the underclothes, so because they're just drenched by the time I get out.
Mm-hmm.
We have a picture in the theater that it's a copy of a Matthew Brady photo, and I ordered it because I read in one of the biographies that Butler was a sort of a flamboyant dresser and was very particular about his clothes, and he always wore a fresh boutonniere, and he tended to wear evening clothes even in the daytime, but that he wore carpet slippers with his military uniform. And in this photograph, but you don't get to do that.
No, we talked about it, but
tried to find opportunity.
It's a little dangerous.
To have carpet slippers out on stage?
In this particular production, it would be a little less than safe.
Yeah.
So good, steady, sturdy shoes are fine.
Especially if you're at like a fort, right? And there's mud outside.
Yes. I will say about backstage and getting ready real quick, and that is, I have, in previous productions, I'd worn wigs, and so there was a great deal of work that had to happen before I got the wig on, with makeup on my face and dressing and whatnot. But my dad is in a assisted living and can never come see me in something, so I videotaped myself getting ready and sped it up, putting the makeup on, and then eventually the wig, and then I start to feel physically different, and my voice changes, and I get the coat buttoned up, and I growl a little bit, and I'm ready to be him. Those are exciting moments, and just before we go out, we always speak to one another, and words of encouragement and whatnot, and it's like going into battle in a way,
So I've heard from some actors that they really feel that they inhabit the role when they have something that happens. Like for some actors, it's the right shoes.
It's very true.
Yeah.
Doug, do you have a story like that?
Well, for this particular production, there's some very tricky language play that happens throughout, and Joe Disher, our director, spent a week doing table work. How long would you say we were doing table?
Almost 4 or 5 days, maybe.
Out of a 2.5 week rehearsal process, just going through the tightness of the language, so that as we're working on it, we're getting those little connections all the way through. So that was actually my favorite part of the process. But I'm one of those people who works from the intellectual in, and so I certainly fall into that situation of trying to understand in a cerebral way everything about the character that I can, and then I get on the set and I have, look at the costume, and suddenly things start to change, and the rigidity, the West Point rigidity kicks in more.
We can't do what we do really without an audience. It is absolutely essential. That food you give me as an audience nurtures me on stage. And we can come alive. So different from film, the things can be done in the editing to make something seem one way, but we really depend on people, and we were itching to have an audience after all that rehearsal and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. It was so exciting. We've had some marvelous audiences.
And we, every audience, you came multiple times,
Very
you get
different.
a slightly different, or
I think
significantly
very
different show based on what the audience is giving us, because we respond in the moment to what is happening in that relationship between the audience and the performance. And when the day that the massive portion of the Butler family was there, it was such a different feel, because all of a sudden we're telling their family story, which is different than somebody from the outside coming in and being like, this is a story I didn't know. These guys all know this story.
Well, this is a fascinating thing about Cape Ann, so I'll just bring it around to a local thing with the few minutes that we have left, and talk about the Cape Ann connection. So you've had Butler's descendants right there in front of you as part of the audience. It's amazing. And also you've done some other work. You had a talk at the Cape Ann Museum, and MJ
led a beautiful discussion there.
A beautiful discussion. And can you tell me a little bit about what that was like, to have this collection of folks who live here, descendants, family, they know the story, they have artifacts of Butler in their family?
I don't know all the descendants, of course. There's a lot of them, but I have met a number of them. They're all individually interesting, very intelligent people, and they all, in one way or the other, feel a real fondness for and loyalty to their ancestor, and it's their common bond. And he was a controversial figure. He had a lot of political enemies, and people wrote terrible things about him, things that persist to this day. I take a more generous view, and I think Butler's descendants do too. But they were very very excited that this play was coming to Gloucester, and that they could share him.
That's great.
There's something about Massachusetts being at the forefront of change that I've noticed since I've lived here. But Butler really embodies a part of that. I mean, not only did he do this, he also wrote the act banning the Ku Klux Klan. He wrote the first Civil Rights Act of 1875 that was thrown out by the Supreme Court several years later. But but really being more than 100 years ahead of
the 10-hour workday was another one.
The 10-hour workday,
yes.
the workers' rights. He just remarkable.
He was a champion of the underdog. He couldn't help himself. That was the way he always saw himself.
Is that why this moment in time, this little slice that you're exploring in the play, that's the point at which maybe all of this stuff started happening, because it was such like...
I think it started early in his life, earlier than that, but moving to Lowell in humble circumstances, a mother running a rooming house and seeing these young women.
And she was a single mother too, right?
Yes, her husband, his father died of typhoid, wasn't it? In St. Kitts as a privateer or something like that.
You might call him a pirate.
Well, we'll say privateer for our relations of Butler out there. But I think I always think of, I think very fondly of Benjamin Franklin Butler, to be sure, but I think his ability to be taught by circumstance is one of the aspects of his personality, of his being, that is most attractive to me. That he was not a rigid, I will never change type of person. He may have come off that way, but he was gathering information, I think, like an attorney does, and building a case either to change his mind and the way he lived, or to remain in a particular frame of mind.
You see this dynamic definitely played out during the play. You
Yes.
watch him grow and change, and his lawyer's background, and it's also just his sense of fairness and humanity
Yes.
that drives the change.
I agree.
And there's humor in the play too. Let's
yes.
touch
Very
on that,
funny.
because there's this battle of the wits that happens in the play that is, and laughing in a very serious subject, in a moment like this. What is it like to use humor, or to balance that humor between the seriousness of the topic and the moral dilemma, and then this fun humor side of things?
You deal with this more directly, but I feel like, you know, audiences dealing with a serious subject matter, if you're preaching to them, become less receptive. Right? Everybody loves somebody who makes them laugh, and so if you can open up to the humor, the more serious stuff actually, I think, resonates more strongly.
And it's not dark humor. It's not making a joke about slavery. It is the wit of the language in the crafting of the play, so that the first scene is a long, it isn't long, but it is a long setup for the rest of the play. And all of these little, they're like, we're hiding Easter eggs, and the audience gets to find them in the second, third, fourth, and fifth scenes of the play, in the first half and the second half, particularly in the second half. They discover, I remember that, I heard that, and all of the other stuff that happened before has informed that moment. You know,
This is no dry history lesson. You know, this is a historic event, but it's not homework.
No.
And what makes it that way is because it is really because the people are so real, and that's one of the things the audience is responding to. Is they recognize themselves in these characters. They recognize people they know. They make an assumption, like Butler, that the slave is going to be something, and as he reveals himself, it catches everyone off guard, and it's really a wonderful journey, this play. It's great.
That's wonderful. M.J. Boylan, thanks for being with us and bringing all your insight. And Ames Adamson, thanks for being here and playing Benjamin Butler. And Doug Bowen-Flynn.
DBF.
Thank you so much for being here. That's all the time we have on Cape Ann Report. Check us out on social media, 1623 Studios. Until the next time on Cape Ann Report, take care.